A New York landlord was fined and targeted by the government because he required tenants, as part of the tenant screening process, to make 2.75 times the monthly rent. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's another story out of the state of New York, which obviously is one of the worst places to be a landlord. Now, I did a poll a little while back, and it was darn near unanimous that landlords in New York have it the absolute worst in the entire country. Specifically in New York City and, the surrounding areas, but, it's getting worse throughout the entire state. So I really do feel for the landlords who are operating up there because, they are just, trying to navigate a minefield of regulations and rules and laws and just tons of anti-landlord politicians who are trying to make their lives miserable. So this is actually coming out of Long Island, and it has to do with a landlord who had, as part of their tenant screening, that hey, a tenant has to make 2.75 times the monthly rent in income. Now, obviously, this is a pretty common thing with landlords throughout the entire country. In fact, for me, I do 3 times the monthly rent. So if my rent, for example, in one of my houses is $1,000 a month, I require the tenant to have a monthly income of at least $3,000 a month in order to rent my house. I mean, it's pretty simple math. It makes things quite easy. But apparently in New York, this goes counter to the state law. And I'm pretty sure you know what it has to deal with. And that's Section 8 tenants, okay? So a lot of Section 8 tenants, they get vouchers which cover a large portion of their rent, and they have very, very low incomes. And that means they won't qualify for the 3x monthly rent income requirement that a lot of landlords have. This is what a lot of landlords were doing in order to get around the rules that were saying, hey, a tenant has to, or a landlord has to accept a tenant who has a housing voucher. Well, a lot of landlords don't want to do that. And I understand why. I've explained it many times that, hey, simply put, it isn't worth the hassle. So they created these other rules to help get them around the law, and now the state is coming after them. And I figured as much. I figured that the state would eventually catch on and start coming after landlords who were doing this. And they're trying to, put a message out there to all the landlords that, hey, you can't be doing this. Well, guess what, state? If anyone from the state of New York is listening, landlords are still going to find ways to not have to comply with this law. If they don't want to rent to Section 8 tenants, they're not going to. And you saying that landlords can't have these income requirements for their for the tenants who are going to be living on their property is almost guaranteeing that landlords are going to get screwed over by tenants who can't afford the rent. And it's what it will do is it will cause landlords to face losses over here, right? And the only response they're going to have is they're going to have to raise rent over here for everyone else. So that will mean that affordable housing will become harder to find, and that rents will go up for everybody. That's what these laws do, okay? The more laws, the more rules, the more regulations that are passed, the harder it is to find affordable housing for tenants. So they're really just screwing themselves over by passing all this stuff. And they're hurting they think they're hurting landlords, but landlords have, a unique ability of finding ways around a lot of rules. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. What do you think of this law up in the state of New York that says landlords can no longer have, require tenants to make, whatever X times the monthly rent and income? Okay, do you think that that's a good idea, or do you think that's a bad idea? Is there anything my personal assessment that I just went over was missing on the issue? Do you think landlords should be required to take Section 8 tenants when they don't make enough money to actually afford the rent on their own? I mean, this is something that obviously a Section 8 tenant is not going to be able to afford to pay the rent if you have that, 3x multiplier in there, right? But I still believe Section 8 should be a voluntary program and landlords should be able to choose whether they want to participate or not. And they shouldn't have to go through all these hoops in order to weed these people out if they don't want to rent to them. Anyway, this article is coming from libn.com, and that's Long Island Business News. And it says, settlement reached in renter income discrimination dispute. Let's get into it. Long Island Housing Services has negotiated a settlement with an apartment landlord over income discrimination complaints. The Fair Housing Organization had filed a complaint with the New York State Division of Human Rights alleging that Brookwood Communities and Camp Bird Management, the landlord's property management company, appeared to be discriminating against people with Section 8 housing vouchers. A LIHS investigation found that prospective renters with housing vouchers seeking apartments at Brookwood Properties were told that they needed a minimum income of 2.75 times the rent. However, state law mandates that a minimum income policy cannot be enforced against individuals with housing vouchers. So yeah, they told people who have housing vouchers that they needed a minimum income of 2.75 times the rent. Now, like I said, this is pretty standard stuff, right? But here's the real question. Did they actually refuse to rent to these people? Are there other Section 8 tenants within this apartment building? So, what I've seen is that, hey, a lot of the times that's just standard language that we use in our rental applications for normal tenants. But for Section 8, a lot of landlords, a lot of property managers will, bypass that. But, that's still part of their standard application for all other tenants. So this landlord might not have done anything wrong, but is still getting screwed over by the state. State guidance on protections from source of income discrimination in housing says that housing providers cannot use an income requirement policy that has a negative impact on low income and housing choice voucher holders. The state and Nassau and Suffolk counties prohibit discrimination based on a lawful source of income. The thing, my problem is, right, and maybe I'm different, but I don't consider a Section 8 voucher as a source of income, okay? A source of income would mean that the tenant actually was getting paid something, like they had money in their hand, okay? Money that could be used for whatever they wanted. If you want to use, like if somebody puts $100 bill in your hand and says, okay, pays you, here's your $100, right? You can use it on anything you want, right? You can go and buy M&Ms with it. You can use it to pay your rent, your car bill, buy gasoline, buy whatever you want. When somebody, the government hands somebody a housing choice voucher, the only thing it can be used on is housing, okay? It's not income, okay? It is a government benefit, yes, but it should not be counted as income. If it is counted as income, then simply put, the people should have to pay taxes on it. And they're not doing that. They're not saying, oh, well, that $1,500 a month that, the government is paying for your rent, that's now income. According to the government, that is income and I can't discriminate against it, but you have to pay taxes on it. Okay, and in New York, the taxes are quite high. So, every year when tax time comes around, guess what? Now you owe the government 10 grand. Nope, they're not doing that though. You know why they're not charging taxes on it? Because it's not income. Yet at the same time, they're claiming that it is income. Or it's income for the purposes of renting to or for the landlord being forced to rent to you, but it's not income in terms of taxes. That makes no sense, okay? It's a government benefit, so it's not income. Landlord should not be forced to accept it, should not be forced to pretend like it is income. As a result of the settlement, Brookwood agreed to settle with Long Island Housing Services for $16,000 and $12,000 each for two individual complainants in monetary damages. In addition, the landlord agreed to policy changes that include adopting a non-discriminatory fair housing policy and a source of income policy. Brookwood also agreed to provide fair housing training to their employees and revise their website to include a statement supporting fair housing laws. Brookwood has several rental complexes on Long Island, including communities in Bayshore, Holbrook, Islip, Oakdale, Ridge, and Sayville. So my bet is that, if they've got this many apartment complexes, they have Section 8 tenants. The bigger the landlord, the more units they have, the more likely that they have some Section 8 tenants already. So it's kind of hard to believe, in my opinion, that this landlord is discriminating against Section 8 if they already have Section 8 tenants in their units. Okay? It's also hard for me to believe that, they had to pay out $16,000 to somebody and $12,000 to somebody else just because they turned them down on a rental application. So here's what I would do as a landlord, okay? And if I was operating in a place that said, hey, you have to rent to, you have to look at these sources of payment, and I didn't want to do it, I just wouldn't tell them that was the reason they were getting rejected. I would find any other excuse to turn those people down. And we would put up all the information and everything just like they want, right? But when it comes down to it, the landlord cannot be forced to do something that they don't want to do. Okay, so if they don't want to rent to Section 8, no matter what the government says, they just aren't going to do it. And they will change their excuse. They will change what they're saying, so that it complies with the law, but they're still not going to be housing people they don't want to house.